Okay, from the very beginning, you can easily see that it's not clear what I have to say. But it's because you're far away, so I will make it closer to you and ask you to use the Xerox, the copies that you have in your hands. I'm going to talk about, to answer the question whether moral intuitions are merely heuristics of substitution. This is the claim which was made by Walter Synod Armstrong together with Lyon, Young, and Thierry Cushman. This is the plan. First, I will present the point of view of the three that I've mentioned. It will be like shortly about what they understand by moral intuitions, heuristics, and how they understand moral heuristics, namely affect heuristics, arguments for their claim, and philosophical implications. So that's part one. Part two will be trying to respond to their stance with 4 or maybe 5 doubts. Number 5 is not on your handout, sorry. To start with, it's good to see what the context is. The context is the debate over moral intuitions. The main question is, can we trust our moral intuitions? Are they credible to give us justified moral beliefs or maybe even moral knowledge? And of course, people like Walter Synod Armstrong, they seem to be skeptics about the positive answer to this question, and they look for different arguments that would show that we can't trust our moral intuitions. Synod Armstrong gave lots of arguments. I focus only on one, but we could see moral intuitions as heuristics. How does he understand moral intuitions? That's not my understanding, that's their understanding. So they believe, or they think moral intuitions are beliefs, moral beliefs which are strong, which means we have high level of confidence and resist counter-arguments, stable, lasts in time, and immediate. So we just grasp them, we have them, formulate them quite immediately, maybe even effortlessly, like in Kahneman's idea of system 1. Heuristics, they take, well, I think it's a general idea, but I guess I might have to explain what is meant here by heuristics. So they are like mental shortcuts, unconscious substitution of certain feature. We have T and H. T is like a target feature, and H like a heuristic feature. I need to explain it with an example. Think about representativeness and probability, two different features. And now a question that you might be asked about John. John is a guy who wears tweed jacket. He's rather thoughtful, likes reading books, and maybe wears a nice hat like Professor Audi does. And then the question is, do you think he's a truck driver or rather a professor of English philology? And most people think, wow, the more probable thing, which is more probable, is that he is the professor of philology. But then, and this is Kahneman's example, Kahneman says, but think a little, how many professors of English philology do we have in the US and how many truck drivers? He says, about 80,000 people might be truck drivers, about 200 people could be professors of English philology. Even if it's only 1 per 1,000 that is fitting this picture among drivers, there could be still more, well, let's say 1 per 200. There would be still more drivers who look like John than professors of philology, English philology, even if all of them fit the picture. So this is an example of a heuristic of substitution. We substitute unconsciously what is called representativeness with probability. We see that the picture represents classical example of a professor of philology, maybe, but it's not the same as probability. People confuse the two things, make rapid answers, and not even notice that they made this substitution. So that's an example of what heuristics are. And now Walter Synod Armstrong with colleagues, they wonder whether this idea could apply to moral intuitions. They make they consider lots of probabilities, but they take finally that the most convincing one is so-called affect heuristics. And in the bracket, there's a description. If thinking about a given action or act makes you feel bad in a certain way, then judge it as morally wrong. So the feeling that we might have about something could be mistaken for, let's say, seeing that something is wrong or understanding that something is wrong. And basing on this feeling, we form a belief. And here we can see that something's wrong with the definition of moral intuitions. They are not beliefs, they are some kind of mechanism based on feelings that lead to formulating judgment or belief. But that is, let's put that aside, it's not so important. What they add up to this is that skeptics, or let's say anti-realists about moral facts, might be worried. They say, just a minute, if you talk about heuristic, you have a real property and heuristic property. Are you not talking about real moral facts here when you think of moral intuitions as heuristics of substitution? There must be something that is substituted with something else. So what they say is, well, not necessarily. So there are those age features, heuristic features, but there are no target features. Maybe. It is possible. What we could talk here about is only about motivational heuristics. I will not explain this term because I don't want to extend the time. If the need be, I will tell something during the Q&A. Now, what arguments can we give for this hypothesis? So, there are two arguments that I will add up. First, there is a high correlation between our moral judgments and emotions. And here the authors refer to Kahneman and to many other authors. In Kahneman's case, in his experiments, the correlation was around 90%, while in others around 76 to 80, as far as I remember. So the correlation is quite high. That could make us think that if so maybe there is a causal relation between affects, emotions, and moral judgment. Besides, if we take this hypothesis, it seems to best explain why, and there are three whys which are actually cut off on your pages. First, why moral intuitions are defeasible. Regularly in heuristics, as the one that I gave you example of, seem to be, not reliable, not very much reliable, at least in unusual cases, which I haven't told you I should have. Two, this hypothesis explains why it is so hard to specify when a given rule is defeated. For example, don't lie when you have not good reason to lie. Now, we can agree that this maybe is true, but tell me when we can apply it. We will always debate about when the good reason takes place. So it's not so easy to falsify those principles. And the third thing, we can, with this hypothesis, explain why people make immediate answers even to complex moral questions. So this is where they are with argumentation, and they also show some philosophical implications which might be worrying to moral intuitionists, but not only. First, if we only have heuristics, we don't have a direct grasp of moral facts. If we don't have direct grasp, then how can we know that there are any moral facts? In case of other heuristics, we have other ways to see that someone was, let's say, making a mistake when judging about John's probability of being a professor of English philology. In case of moral judgments, we have no other way to check it. So there's no direct insight. Maybe there are no moral facts. So it could be worrying to moral realists as well. Two, moral intuitions, therefore, are not reliable. They might be reliable in terms of survival. For example, Peter Singer, in one of his papers, says, moral intuitions worked very well a few thousand years ago, but since our technology went forward and moral intuitions, which are the product of evolution, are not able to catch up with this development, they are useless anymore, at least in some situations. And here I would, you remember those two cases, trolley case, when we not directly push someone off the bridge, but we just switched the handle. Our evolution didn't know there would be any handles to switch. And in case of the brother and sister, our evolution didn't know there would be something like counterconception. Therefore, our emotions make us feel that something's wrong, even if we are doubly secured. I have something extra to say to those examples, because I think they require debate, but I will come back to that if time allows me to. Now, if we understand moral intuitions this way, they give consequentialists a very good answer to their critics, who very often criticize consequentialism by counterexamples. Simply, those counterexamples are no worth anymore because they are based on moral intuitions that are not reliable. Therefore, utilitarians, hip hip hooray. Now, can we answer to this? So I think that, first of all, generally I would say it's a kind of jumping conclusion that could be made here. I don't say that they make jumping conclusion, because Walter Synod Armstrong and colleagues, they just suggest it might be so. They are smart enough not to say it is so. But let's think in terms like someone claims it is so. So first, I think there is a very important disanalogy between regular heuristics and if we have moral heuristics in their case. What kind of disanalogy? First, if we claim that something is just a substitution heuristic, we have a criterion to show it, to check it. It's easy to understand how we mix probability with representativeness, but we don't have such criterion in moral case. So we use the argument against, which was used by the other side, against the other side. Another disanalogy, quite important, is that heuristics are mostly unconscious, while in case of moral heuristics, we would be quite often aware of our emotions. Think about Hare's example in his book, Sorting Out Ethics. He says, I'm at the gas station, I've just tanked my car, I'm about to pay, but I notice nobody's there. There are no cameras, nothing. I could just sit in my car and go away. But then I have this unrestingness, or this feeling it would be wrong. And he says, look closely at what happens in you, and you'll discover these are just feelings. So if you are able to discover feelings in moments, at moments when you make moral decisions, these are not typical heuristics. So these are disanalogies. That's argument one, I would say, against Walter Synod Armstrong's view. Two, the concept of moral intuition seems very thin or narrow. It talks merely about moral intuitions in terms of emotions. But there are moral claims based on intuitions which are more rational. Just to give you a least controversial example, there are claims which are called non-substantial or formal moral claims. They are two moral claims. For example, if for the same work someone is given this sum of money and the other person is given less money for the same type of work, therefore something's wrong here. Is this intuition based on emotions or purely understanding certain ideas? Maybe it's not a substantial claim. Maybe it's just a non-substantial or formal claim. There are other concepts of moral intuitions, like seemings. There are understandings. I will not develop this argument because this one is maybe not the most important. The most important is number 3, which might turn into number 4 as well. Emotions are not merely those strange feelings that go through our bodies or heads. Emotions seem to have content. They seem to be propositional or at least intentional. They have objects of their intention. We could say, and I follow Sabina Roser and maybe a little bit also Ronald de Souza, but he has a special view on this. They also have cognitive aspect. They inform. An example, if I'm scared of a gap standing on the mountain, my being scared, my feeling of fear might be informing me about something that is about the place that I'm standing at, that it is dangerous. Can we say that emotion is blind and I make post hoc rationalization of my fear? Or I feel fearful. Maybe it's because it's so high, and this maybe it's because it's just post hoc rationalization, as it would be suggested by the other side. I don't think so, and I think there are some experiments that show this cognitive aspect of emotions. I will just mention one name. It's Manfrinati, the Italian psychologist. His paper was issued in 2013, and he suggests that experiments by Hyde, Green, they have been framed in not a very objective or, let's say, fair way to the issue, to the problem. So I advise reading the paper. Now, it is related, the fourth argument is related to the third one. we can understand this cognitive aspect of emotions in terms of perception. Like when we talk about colors, sounds, and other phenomenal aspects of our perception, we could also say that feelings with their phenomenal content are analogous to the other ones. In what way? Well, as with the example of fear and being something being danger, there is a kind of content in my feeling, and when reflecting on it, I'm able to formulate certain propositions or certain beliefs about, not just about moral obligations, but about certain features, like, for example, that something is brutal or that something is unfair. I can use particular terms which have some meaning. Number 5 is the one which is not numbered. I mean, it is still there. I think you can see it. If Synod Amstrup is right about intuitions, moral intuitions, that they are merely heuristics, then he must be also claiming that all perception is of that sort. And there are some reasons to think that way. For example, if I see colors, colors in phenomenal way are, let's call them, the features in my mind, while on the part of the things that I call, for example, red, there is some counterpart feature, which is correlated with my seeing it, but it's not the same. So we would say that we mistake one feature which is phenomenal with something outside in the world. So there could be some kind of heuristic of substitution. Does it suffice to reject perception? It does not. I have to be honest, and I have to admit right away that there is some argument to tell those apart, like causal story. But I will not extend it because I see like 20 minutes is already behind me. Therefore, I will end here with just a suggestion that maybe we have good reasons not to think that moral intuitions are merely heuristics of substitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have time for questions.
I see you're tired.
Just a second, please.
One question. Do you think that you said that we should have some doubts that moral intuitions are not merely heuristics, but do you agree that some heuristics are, some moral intuitions are heuristics of substitution?
Well, I would agree that quite often we might, especially if we are not sophisticated, if we don't reflect, we might not look deeply into the content of our moral perception, and we just are happy enough with identifying a certain feeling. There are people who, seeing someone in suffering, they feel this, let's say, they don't feel comfortable with this, and that may, influence their thinking that something's wrong, let's say. So it would be a kind of, let's say, taking the easy way, which means maybe a heuristic. But it's not a kind of heuristic which would shut us off from getting to not heuristic feature, but the target feature. So if we start thinking, we are able to go through what seems to us at first sight and might be misleading, to go through this content critically and have better quality seemings about the matter, and then we can formulate judgments which are justified. Of course, it's the matter of empirical research. I mean, if people, when they are trained to be more reflective, if they commit less errors when judging certain situations. But to give you, I said I would come back to those examples with, that were given, the brother and sister case. It is so easy to say, look, these people stick to saying it's not good, it's wrong, even though we explained the thing. They have double security. What's wrong with that? They are closer to each other after the event. They won't tell anybody after the event. Why shouldn't they? And then the conclusion Zinger and others make is they simply follow blindly the feeling without even knowing what good reason they could give. But this is not true. Let's think about these two, they might not become pregnant, but does it not change their personalities? Does it not make them make the same decision in the future more easily, maybe without protection? What about if they lose certain ability to love another person because they made a kind of wrong decision, which makes them to start the relationship with another person too quickly, from the wrong side? Think about people who had premature sex. It might be somehow influencing their personality in this way, like twisting their understanding of love. I think these issues are important, but they never appear in those papers because probably they are too requiring, I would say, they would require philosophical analysis going into very detailed, subtle questions which are so difficult to verify or falsify by empirical studies. So let's better keep them aside. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope a little bit.
Only a short comment. The problem is that in this research, nobody gave such an answer that you gave. So this is actually the problem. Nobody thought about it.
Well, I have, look, but take a look. I have thought about it. Many people that I've talked to, not only philosophers, have thought about it. I just wonder why they didn't. Maybe they were in a situation like in Milgrams' experiment. You know, the authority of the scientists makes them a little bit paralyzed, so they don't develop their reports. They just answer quickly. They just have this question, yes or no, this way or that way. You know, we would have to take a closer look if they were given a chance to develop to be reflective a little bit.
On this point, do you know how long they were given in order to give their answer?
Unfortunately, I have no idea.
Well, okay, that's important though, and you're bringing that out. I wanted to say that perception is not reliable under all conditions. There are conditions favorable to perceiving, say, color and shape, and conditions unfavorable, and the same applies to intuition. And just to reinforce that, have you brought into your analysis the difference between making a judgment of prima facie wrongness or prima facie obligation and of overall wrongness or overall obligation?
I haven't said anything, but of course I have been thinking about it. This is the point which is also made by David Kaspar in his book on Intuitionism. He says there are certain things we grasp as necessary truths, like, for example, lying is prima facie wrong. Of course, the term prima facie is quite important, and it allows us to see this truth even if in given circumstances we feel that we have good reasons which override this prima facie obligation not to tell the truth or to lie. And there are those particular intuitions that we have when we apply certain moral, let's say, principles or ideas, concepts, and we say, well, was this lying? Or was this unfair treatment? Then reliability is not a strong side of those grasps. I would say, well, maybe we need a training, maybe we need more reflection, and even then we might say it's still the weaker side of moral intuitions. The strong ones are about more general principles, prima facie principles, I would say.
The second comment in your paper seems to suggest moral education in two senses, in the way that moral intuitions or reactions are something that is being taught and then can be consciously shaped. So the question is, how would you envision that such moral education, both to the point when it is given and then when it can be done by us?
I see. I think there are two important parts of such education. In one, I follow Michael DePaul when he talks about formative experience. Formative experience may have lots of sources. One of them is just participating in certain events, like helping the old person cross the street, or just doing something good and be able to experience the feelings of others and see that it was good what we did. The other way is by reading heroic stories, which is McIntyre's idea, but also DePaul recognizes that stories can be a kind of substitute for real action in real world, and they also show us how to perceive other people's feelings, other people's minds, expectations, take these into account in our perception or in our thinking. And the other, that would be formative experience. And the other, of course, reasoning. The method I would advise was like reflective equilibrium in a popular version. I mean, not a very sophisticated philosophical one that we go to the wide reflective equilibrium, but at least looking for any possible contradictions between our intuitions, looking for consequences of our decisions. So this kind of reasoning or reflection, I would rather say, I think should be a part of moral education. And of course, you can never guarantee. People are more naturally born genius in moral way, others not. But I believe it would adapt to the quality of individuals.
As for the moral intuitions or emotions that they have content, that also parallels Nussbaum's Martin Nussbaum's understanding in poetic justice. When she talks about rational emotions, she has a different one, but she also, she brings out the rational emotions, and on the basis of Dickens, in order to show that emotions are not irrational, for one, and that it is important that they are educated and they can be reshaped.
I think it's like in professionals' intuitions. When you are a chess player or when you are a doctor looking at an X-ray, you might have those intuitions after a long training, and of course you can use them. I forgot to add up one important name in my opinion, John Bollender, who is going the same direction than Kahneman, but I think he gives more rationalistic description of intuitions in general, not only moral intuitions. They use, according to him, I'm not a naturalist of that sort, but I think it's a good argument anyway. We have our brain uses certain sets of neurons that are task fulfilling. Of course, they have narrow perspective, but they are good at what they are doing on, let's say, statistical level. And it's the work of our conscious self to compare those intuitions that are produced by those sets of neurons. And we can, let's say, structure those sets of neurons by special training. And then we have those expert intuitions. And I guess there could be virtuous intuitions, which could be moral experts' intuitions.
It seems to me that heuristics are neural shortcuts. They're just ingrained, or neural shortcuts, neural paths that are, for whatever reason, they're just neural shortcuts, and obviously they can be retrained.
Yeah, they can be just shortcuts, and they could be trained shortcuts, which means they are no shortcuts anymore. They are more sophisticated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.